Hark. It's an 87th Precinct podcast. This is the only podcast in the world dedicated to Ed McBain's seminal series of police procedural novels, which began in 1956 with Cop Hater and ended in 2005 with Fiddlers. There were 55 books in the series, and today's podcast looks at book number 29, Bread. To review the book, I'm joined by my two colleagues, Mr. Morgan All About the Benjamins Brown.
Hello there.
And Mr. Stephen Brother Can You Spare a Dime Royston.
Hello.
My name is Paul Abbott, and my bathtub is full of pennies, which I try and bathe in like some sort of grotesque Scrooge McDuck. Very low-rent Scrooge McDuck. But on the subject of money, should you wish to help raise the standard of the currency that I currently bathe in, then a donation to the running of the podcast would be very much appreciated, especially as we've got new microphones and everything. So if you visit ko-fi.com, coffee.com, and drop us $3 for a digital coffee, we'll be eternally grateful. Anything we get goes straight back into the running and hosting of the show. If you're not going to give us any money, and you don't have to, please, tell a friend or leave us a comment or a review or share the podcast wherever you can. That would be great. And so let's get back now to 1974 and Bread, and let's have a look at what's what. 1974. Book number 29.
Rattling through them.
We are, yes.
The same speed as
we've always had.
Always had.
I thought what I'd do, actually, because although we normally do our contextual chat in the bonus episode, I have got a little bit of contextual stuff to just try and help put this into, the sense of the time, the zeitgeist,
if you will.
Time Ghost. Publication history for Bread is it came out in Random House in 1974. That was the US hardback, the original publication. Simultaneously in Hamish Hamilton hardback in the UK in 74. And then the paperbacks in Signet and Pan were 75 for Signet, and the UK one didn't come out until 76. So a bit of a delay there.
Crikey.
Let me tell you what else Evan Hunter / Ed McBain was up to in 1974. Evan Hunter released the novel Streets of Gold.
It's a cracker.
Yeah, that's an excellent, very, very autobiographical novel. I don't think people realise quite how autobiographical it is, but it's very interesting. There was a few short stories, but we're well past Manhunt and all that stuff now, and Argosy, because those have more or less all folded by the mid-70s.
Oh, sad times.
How do you find out about kayaking with the Duke of Edinburgh anymore?
Well, exactly. But I'm not going to make you go through the content page for some of these magazines. I mean, there's one called The Jesus Case, which was from one of the other books we talked about.
Oh, yeah.
That was 2 books ago, wasn't it?
It was.
In Alfred Hitchcock's mystery magazine. There's a story called Jazzing in A Flat.
Nice.
Jazzing.
Yes, by Evan Hunter, published in Playboy. It's also in the French and the German Playboys.
Jazzing.
A story called Hot Cars by Evan Hunter.
Hot car.
That was in a magazine called Genesis, which I believe was a bit of a men's magazine / Playboy knockoff. It wasn't not about the band Genesis.
It's just some kind of fan magazine of Genesis, which also has Evan Hunter's fiction in.
Middle spread of Tony Banks covered in jam or something like that.
On a hot car.
Yeah, on a hot Leyland Princess or something like that.
Yeah, as far as I know, Evan Hunter didn't get into writing Genesis fan fiction and sending it into them.
But if only he had.
Mike Rutherford looks really handsome in the latest gatefold sleeve Genesis album. I don't know what they were releasing around.
He also did a story called The Analyst, which was also in Playboy. So, as you can see, I'm not going to make you go through the contents of an issue of Playboy to read out, to look for hilarious things, because I suspect it won't be hilarious.
Hot cars. No.
But there was one of the early adaptations by the Czechoslovakian TV company based on Killer's Choice, which is called Koho si vybral vra. That's best I can pronounce that.
Sounded good to me.
They're the ones that had the music that never ended.
No, there was
peculiar about there.
There was 3 Czechoslovakian ones in the 70s that were done separate, and then there was the ones in the 80s and 90s, which were the ones with the dreadful background music
that never ended.
Yeah. That's what Evan Hunter was up to at the time. But let's have a look at some general stuff around 1974, just to put things in context. I didn't know this, but maybe everyone else in the world did. The 1st of January 1974 in the UK, it was the first time New Year's Day was a public holiday.
All right.
I did not know that either.
I just assumed it was always, a day of rest.
Everyone's straight back to work with their hangovers.
Yeah. So that's
amazing.
Just feels very contemporary, really.
Wow, yeah.
4th of February, Patty Hearst is kidnapped.
Oh, yes.
I think we talked a bit about that when we were doing King's Ransom and looking at kidnapping stories.
Was that the Black Panther?
It was the I forgot what the name of the group was. It was like a far left group, wasn't it?
The Weather Underground or Bader-Meinhof, one of those kind of revolutionary left groups.
It was, yeah, and then of course there's all the stuff about the her going up to end up on their side. Mm. We definitely did do research about it and talked about it on the King's Ransom episode or the Bone. So you can go back and listen to that because I've forgotten.
Yeah. Once upon a time, we knew something.
Yeah. That's the joy of recording everything you say. You don't have to try and remember it yourself. 29th of March 1974, the Terracotta Army is discovered in China by some farmers digging a well. Crikey. Which I find absolutely extraordinary given the scale of it and what it represents. And, we were very lucky to see it last year in Liverpool when some of it was on tour. But just the idea you're just digging a well one day and discover hundreds and hundreds of terracotta warriors.
You get a bit freaked out, wouldn't you?
You certainly would, I'd imagine, yeah.
Yeah, it must have been quite the thing. 1974 is the year that Dungeons and Dragons, the role-playing games, first released.
Terrific.
What do you want to tell me about 1974 in British politics, Steve-O? Know anything?
There was 2 general elections in 1974.
There was. We had a hung parliament in the early election and then the later one where we got a very slim Labour majority.
Indeed.
So Edward Heath out, Harold Wilson in. That was what was going on in the UK. Sensible politics. And of course we were talking a lot about Nixon and what was going on with Watergate in the last episode. But he resigns in August of 74. Yeah. Gerald Ford gets sworn in. Mm-hmm. And the following month, pardons Nixon.
Of course he does.
There you go. Mad. But some books that were released in 1974, just on the subject of other authors. Peter Benchley releases Jaws.
Marvellous.
It's all right, the book of Jaws, but the film is a lot better. Mm.
It's quite difficult to get your teeth into, isn't it?
That's what happens when you do a recording on an afternoon. Puns start turning up. John le Carré does releases Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Oh, he does.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Big favourite of mine.
Yes.
Good book, good TV series, good film. Generally very good. Mm-hmm. James Herbert releases The Rats.
Oh, great stuff. First of the trilogy.
What are the other ones? The Rats,
the Lair,
Squirrels.
and there's... Well, I think it's just furthering humanity trying to deal with these rats.
Oh, right.
I've never read any of those ones.
What, are rats just taking over the world?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. It gets more and more desperate. Oof, dark times.
What happens?
I can't remember. I haven't read them for something like 30 years, but when I was 10, they were amazing.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's without... Erica Young releases Fear of Flying, which is a very powerful feminist statement at the time, I think. But Joseph Wamber puts out The Onion Field, which I recently bought, so I've got that ready to read. Tell you what, let's get stuck into bread. And I'll give you one little interesting factoid before we get going.
What, about bread?
About the book Bread, not about bread as a concept.
I had some bread for lunch.
Oh, I had some bread this morning as well. It's almost universal.
It is almost. I too had some bread.
Well, we're definitely the people to be talking about this then, aren't we?
We're experts in the field.
In the archive of Evan Hunter, the original manuscript for this book, the title of the book is Money, Money, Money.
Oh, right.
Which, of course, ends up being the title of the 51st book in the series, not until 2001.
It's a curious name for the book, actually, isn't it?
A little bit, yeah, I think so.
Doesn't really involve...
It feels like a bit of an afterthought.
Yeah, because it sort of starts out with a lot of talk about money in terms of how much someone stands to make off them, some sales of stuff and insurance and things like that. But really, then we sort of get away from that, don't we?
We do a little bit.
Could come up with a better name ourselves, couldn't we? For it, maybe.
You know what? We'll save the contemporary reviews until after we've given our opinion, and then we'll see if we if our reviews jive with the jive.
They might jive.
Agree with
jive. My review is going to jive.
I imagine I'll be jiving with Newgate Calendar all the way.
There's a good name for an album, Jiving with Newgate Calendar. No one would have a clue what that meant. I don't think we do.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get stuck into this.
Let's get jiving.
Let's get jiving with bread, man.
Pronts.
Pronts?
Pronto.
Oh, right, pronts. Don't know what's going on.
I'm not up to date with this youth lingo.
No, definitely. I'm sorry, everyone, if we're leaving you behind.
Jive talk, that was.
Yeah. Goodness me. Right, well, let's get stuck into the book.
Oh, yeah.
Let's have opening thoughts. Because we've just come off the back of Hail to the Chief. Very specific, very targeted satire about gang violence.
Seems to be a little bit return to normality, if there's such a thing.
Kind of a bit more back to business as we'd expect, I think.
A reasonably straight up who done it. Yeah. Well, who done something.
And I think there was a suggestion from one of our Twitter followers, I think it was Hank Wellman, was suggesting I think this is starting to display a lot of the signs of the darker things to come. And it's not like they've been particularly light-hearted, any of the books up to this point, but we definitely know that what's coming in the 87th Precinct series from here on in starts to get pretty dark. Lots more thrillers rather than mysteries.
Yeah, it feels like a little bit of a foreshadowing of some of the 80s stuff, definitely. I can see that.
Yeah, especially off the back of something so different as Hail to the Chief. I think it's quite a complicated book.
It is. It is. There's a lot of convoluted dealings going on. It takes some getting them straight in your head. I'm still not sure I actually did, but...
Yeah. Well, I had to make write myself a little précis to try and make sure I actually understood what the concept was.
Excellent. You can explain it to us all as you go.
Well, yeah. So, what's it about, Steve-O?
Well, it starts with a big fire, doesn't it? Well, it doesn't start with a fire. It starts after the fire. Post-pyro... doesn't it?
Yeah.
With this bloke who comes into the precinct trying to hunt down Andy Parker, who's busy drinking beer in his
pants,
scratching his balls
marvellous
on
way
holiday.
To spend your holiday, yeah. He knows how
and
live.
he's tracing up progress on the investigation into his warehouse factory.
So he can get the insurance.
Yeah, the insurers are refusing to pay out, and Andy Parker's off, but he'd not really...
Yeah, he hadn't done
moved on. He couldn't really make head nor tail of what had gone on.
It's interesting having Andy Parker in this book as our gross, lazy slob cop, but putting him then into, put him on holiday, so he's not actually there to affect the outcome of the case. He's just he has like one scene where Corella goes to see him, but he has been for years our touchstone of the bigot, the lazy, the fat cop, but we've got something coming up that's going to not mirror it exactly, but something to challenge that role in the books.
Absolutely. I think there's a point where there's even we get Steve Carella himself making a direct kind of comparison between the two of them, don't we?
Yeah.
Parker and this new character who we're introduced to in this book, which is an exciting development.
Yeah. So we open with a lot of this guy saying, well, I've been ordering these little wooden animals from Germany, West Germany.
As
it would have been then. Which in my mind, I'm imagining... I was always imagining them to be quite small, but then by the end, you have to imagine them a bit bigger, I think.
I guess so, yeah. I was thinking kind of Christmas ornaments or something.
Yeah, which would make sense, because I think Germany's a place that produces a lot of ornaments like that, don't they?
You can't move for them when you're there, can you?
You're always stepping on tiny wooden reindeers. Tiny balsa reindeers.
Yeah, I had something.
I was definitely
small.
envisaging something that you would see on about 15 different stalls at your average Christmas market. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. But I think they're a little bit larger. But he's been importing them. He's been very entrepreneurial, living the American dream by bringing them in at one price, selling them at another, then bringing in another load. And it's this second load that he hasn't sold yet that is destroyed in this factory fire. Mm-hmm. And he needs the insurance so he can pay for the shipment that's coming in. And that's why he's there, being a pain in the neck.
Yeah, there's lots of talk about pyromania, hasn't there? And fire freaks, or whatever he calls them. Firebugs, that's it.
Yeah.
But the curious thing, they rule that out because the security guards have been drugged, haven't they? Which takes this into kind of a different area of investigation. The initial thing is to work out how the
How the
security
fire-
guards were drugged, which has quite an amusing scene as him trying to eventually get them to fess up that they drink a bit of booze whilst working the night shift.
Everyone in this book that they speak to is cagey and lies in their first response. Even the people who are victims in it, their first response is to lie, like the two night watchmen who were drugged, so that someone could set the place on fire.
So they're like, well, we don't know how we were drugged either. It's totally perplexing. But they end up fessing up that they figure that the booze must have been tampered with, and the only other person who knew about the existence of the booze was the day security guard, wasn't it? It suddenly takes a very dramatic turn when Corella sort of goes, all right, well, it must have been the other guy who slipped them the Mickey, was it chloral hydrate or whatever it is, in their drink. And he goes to find him, and because he's already spoken to him once, and he comes back and finds him with holes in his face.
Yes.
So immediately things take a turn.
Yeah, things escalate rather quickly.
Yeah, there's all sorts sort of going on here, and you don't really know. You don't know if the guy who comes in is under suspicion or not. Corella is quite rightly saying, well, until we've signed this case off, we can't say that it definitely wasn't you.
Who's that?
Roger Grimm, the guy whose warehouse it was.
The CEO of Grimports.
Grimports, which is a very good name.
Well, he appears not to have anything to gain from setting fire to his own factory, really.
And indeed, by the end of the first chapter, his house has been burned down.
Yeah, indeed.
Which, if you're doing it to yourself, would be quite an extreme thing to do.
So that has to be investigated as well. As you say, there's some very interesting talk about the mentality of arsonists and the sort of kicks they get, the psychology of fire setting, stuff like that, which I presume would have been his research task for this book, would have been to look into that sort of thing. Maybe he burnt some buildings to the ground just to see what it felt like. I don't know.
Absolutely.
But there's a great scene when Corella does have to go and visit Parker to find out what he'd actually done and what he thought about it. And he sat there and he's thinking, he hasn't offered me a beer. Why hasn't he offered me a beer? And he doesn't really want one, but he wants him to offer him one just so he can make a quip as he leaves.
Yeah, he's got to put down ready.
Which is it's a side of Corella you've not really necessarily seen, where he's planning ahead to take the mickey out of Andy Parker, which is good. It's a Corella and Hawes investigation, isn't it? So it's a Cotton Hawes one. He's a bit more upfront in this than he's been in quite a few ones.
He's been sort of backgrounded for quite a while, hasn't he? So it's quite nice to see him back again.
Yeah, and there's some reference as well to Christine Maxwell as being his girlfriend, who we haven't heard about for a while.
Yeah, it's still his girlfriend. We do actually see the rare sight of Cotton Hawes managing to resist someone's advances.
Yes, indeed. His his sexy status being, put to one side to some extent. But yeah, there's a Randy landlady.
Randy
landlady. And but it's this, while he's investigating where the guy was, the daytime security guard who's been killed, is that he discovers an address in Diamondback, which is essentially the black ghetto of Isola. And he's up there investigating something when he basically comes across a gang of people. So there's another gang in this. He goes to speak to someone who, a girl he meets called Elizabeth Benjamin, who doesn't want to talk to him, but when she does, she goes and turns a tap on. So he's, why have you turned the tap on? What's the waterfall for? And so you've got another, it's like, oh, well, must be bugged. And suddenly you're in a whole other world with this stuff. And we end up with someone else dead in the lobby of a business in Diamondback.
Which seems to leave a lot of the other people in the building bizarrely unfazed. I thought that it's not really a particularly big deal, this guy winding up dead in the lobby.
I've been clubbed to death in the lobby of a multi-use office area. But it does mean that they have to bring in a different precinct for the investigation of that death. The 83rd, the 83, and we meet Detective Ollie Weeks. So, what do we think of Ollie on his debut?
Well, he's certainly a colourful character, isn't he?
He arrives pretty much fully formed as well. It's not like he's just sort of tentatively introducing him. He's got all his defining characteristics right there, hasn't he? He's called Big Ollie Weeks once in this, and then we settle into Fat Ollie, and it never really changes after that.
I think the suggestion is he likes being called Big Ollie, but everyone just calls him Fat Ollie.
Yeah, you clearly get the impression that he intended to make him a full character from day one, really, because most of the other detectives who get introduced are just kind of...
here and gone again.
Yeah, whereas you get the feeling that he's here to stay, and indeed he is.
Definitely, and he's big, as his name suggests. He's pretty gross, he's violent, he's openly racist, but he's a good cop. And that's the difference between him and Parker, is he is actually a cop who cares about doing his job, even if it does mean that he will... I don't think he takes shortcuts, he just forces issues somewhat.
Yeah, he's actually, in many respects, extremely meticulous, isn't he? But,
well, that's how he'd totally contrast to Andy Parker, I suppose, isn't it?
At the same time, operates with fairly extreme prejudice, which...
But he always thinks his prejudice is totally justified.
Yeah, he's completely confused every time anyone points out that he's a massive bigot, isn't he?
Yeah.
He doesn't really get it at all.
Quite often his totally initial thoughts on people turn out to be correct in that they're not up to good, because there's a strange development company in this, and he just thinks it's a bullshit operation without any evidence whatsoever, doesn't he?
Yeah.
It turns out he's correct, but you've got absolutely no evidence upon which to base that.
But we're going to see a lot more of Fat Ollie as the series goes on between now and the final book. We don't see him for the next story, but then he's in a run of 3, or at least makes brief appearances. Then there's a bit of a gap for a few years where he pops up occasionally, but in the last run of books,
he's one of the main
characters,
to remember,
including his own featured story, by the time of Fat Ollie's book, which is one of the really interesting late entries in the entire series. Yeah, I don't know that you like him as a person, but his presence in the book is something really to enjoy.
I think that's exactly how you sum it up. Yeah,
I think he's on the whole, McBain handles him really skillfully as well. So you do recognise immediately that he's basically really vile, but he does also allow enough redeeming features to come through that you have a little sliver of sympathy for him occasionally.
Yeah, you end up, as the series go on, kind of willing him to better himself, and enrich himself, which he kind of does, doesn't he? He does. In some of the later books,
he finds his prejudice is being challenged quite a lot, and he is capable of some sort of change.
Yeah,
but it is goes slowly, almost sort of glacial pace.
Yeah, it's getting sort of some understanding out of him sometimes is a bit like blood out of a stone, isn't it? But it's an interesting development, definitely. And yeah, I think it's really well handled, and I think it's good having characters like that who aren't just sort of this sort of black and white, good cop or bad cop and nothing in between, because it just kind of adds.
And he kind of is your in between, isn't he?
In this, he's so concerned about getting his case right that he's ringing up Corella in the middle of the night because he can't sleep for thinking about it. Yeah. And Corella's like, "What? It doesn't matter. Wait till the morning." And then Cotton Hawes is ringing up saying, "Ollie's just called me. I think he's right." He's been dragged out of bed at 5 a.m. to go and try and trick someone from the third partner from this development company into revealing something by planning to use Corella as someone
prisoner, a pretend suspect, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all,
I'm not entirely sure that comes out of the police manual.
No,
indeed not. But no, he's a good new addition anyway.
He certainly is.
And fast forwarding to the very end of the book, Corella and Hawes are forever having a go at him, aren't they, and displeasing of his ways. And he's totally oblivious to the fact that they don't really like him. And he's like, you know what, I really love working with you guys. I might get a transfer.
The thing as well is that in spite of themselves, sometimes they do find him very funny because he's got a great line in quips and little sort of jokes that aren't racist or whatever, but they determinedly try not to show that they're laughing at him.
Yeah, I like the one where he's busted the lock or something, and they're saying something like, "Who's going to fix the lock or something?" And he says, "Oh, don't worry about that. Where you're going, there's plenty of locks." Which I thought was quite a funny line.
He also apparently does has a fine line in W.C. Fields' impressions. Have either of you two ever seen any W.C. Fields movies?
I've not seen a single W.C.
I feel
Fields
like
film.
I really ought to have.
I've seen bits and pieces here and there. I don't. It's not like I'm completely in the dark over who W.C. Fields is, but I've never seen any extended bits of business
I've
by
only
him.
ever seen sort of the odd clip, really.
I feel I am totally in the dark.
Well-
Sounds too much like W.G. Grace, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, you don't get those two mixed up. It would be. It's yeah. Well, he was just a big comedy star, wasn't he? Basically, a comic actor.
Oh,
With
right.
he's very larger than life. Lots of particular sort of types of business. I think there's quite a famous pool room scene or something like that he's done. Ollie quite happily plays up to being a big guy and using that sort of shtick,
Yep.
which was probably really outdated even in the 70s.
I'd imagine so, yeah. He's kind of the sort of Laurel and Hardy kind of generation of film comedy, isn't he, really, I think?
He is. We see lots of Ollie, and he's very helpful in tying together lots of threads, basically, which is that we've got this warehouse and house being burnt down, we've got a dead security guard, we've got a dead guy in the building of where Diamondback Developments is.
Who's the guy that they think was the link between the dead security guard, because he'd been seen visiting him, hadn't
Yes,
he?
from
They don't
the
really,
testimony of the
they don't
landlady.
know the link, other than they know this guy visited him, and therefore they think that this development company is involved, but they can't, for the life of them, figure out why or what was in it or anything until they meet the lady in the flat.
In the bug department.
No,
The landlady...
no, the other one, Wagoner.
Oh, Rosalie Wagner.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah, well, so she's a little comes in a little later on as another person lying about everything.
Yeah.
But they're pretty much in the dark until they meet her.
Yeah, more or less. But in the meantime, Elizabeth Benjamin in the bug department is getting beaten up by some people, but because it's a bug department, they end up with it all on tape. So she survives and she can identify certain people, which is handy. And also they're able to use her image to try and solve another link in the chain. But there's a really horrible interrogation scene where they've brought in these gang guys, and Hawes figures something out by pure chance, so that the long arm of coincidence is in the book as very often it is in these. And yeah, they're playing back the way they're conducting this interview with these potential assaulters of this girl is to play back the tape recording from the bugs in the apartment, which is about as effective a way of breaking someone down as it could be. Again, I'm not entirely sure you'd be able to do that, but I'm no lawyer.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Certainly in terms of 1970s police procedure, maybe that kind of stuff went down all the time. I couldn't possibly say.
Well, indeed. Yeah, there's a little bit of a penny dropping moment where they've got someone on tape saying, "Hold her, let her go," or something like that. And they're just, why would you say "hold her, let her go"?
Yeah.
Then he remembers he's met someone called Jamie Holder. He's like, yeah, got it.
Very clever. Very clever.
Very clever lad. One of the things with this book I think is interesting is a lot of chapters that are shuffling of cards, which ultimately results in something they call the poker game, where they bring all these people together to try and get them to trick each other. And
That's quite a good scene, that,
It
isn't it? At
is,
the end,
it's-
where he's got all the main characters
Really-
sat around, a bit like Agatha Christie, isn't it? Get
Yeah, I
everyone
suppose it
get
is.
over in a room and see the guilty party
Yeah, it's
inadvertently confess.
something you don't get really in these novels otherwise. But yeah, it is very much like that. It's nicely staged, I think.
Because even still at that point, they still really don't know what the deal is, do they?
no, and the reader certainly doesn't by that point.
They're still in the dark. They know one or all or
And have some
of those,
hunches.
are guilty of something, but they're not quite sure who of what.
But they're definitely going in like they know everything.
Yeah.
But they're trying to follow a trail of money, which is the bread of the title of the book, really, which is insurance money. It's money from this business, Diamondback Development. It's a $5,000 payment to who's the guy who's shot.
Yeah.
There's the guy who's the photographer who's beaten to death. He's getting paid only a little bit of money, but he's living a very luxurious life. Turns out he's a pornographer, essentially. Although, as McBain points out, the stuff you can buy on the shelves makes that job almost redundant, really.
By that stage, yeah. And there's also payments to the guy in Germany who's meant to have been packing the the little wooden animals, which we have to try and trace as well. And
there's a bit of a breadcrumb from that early on, isn't there? Because in the correspondence that Carella goes through of Roger Grimm's, there's this acknowledgement of a payment in Germany that
how did that check
he only made 2 days before. And so, like, Carella's suspicious of Roger Grimm from the beginning, but you can't get any reason why he would still burn his own. But there's something... You're always led to believe that Roger Grimm's not quite what he presents himself to be. Yes, that's quite interesting. But then he meets somebody who just so happens to have been to Bremen at the same time, which is too much of a coincidence, I suppose.
Well, I think it's interesting. There's the interrogation scene with Rosalie Waggoner, who is this girl that turns up who's associated with Diamondback Developments, and, as it turns out, has a passport with a stamp for Germany in.
Yeah.
So everything starts to come together. But they do a very classic bit of tricking her in the interrogation, where they say, "How did you know to visit Bachmann?" The name of the German contact.
Oh, yeah.
And she says, "I don't know anyone called Erhard Bachmann." It's like, got you. He didn't tell you his first name.
Yeah. Straight out of the Columbo, that, isn't it?
Or what's its name? Great Escape or something. It's a very simple trick.
Yeah. So she ends up essentially confessing, doesn't she?
Yeah, to having been the mule for the money.
Yeah.
You already know she's done something very sketchy, because there's a lot of back and forth about, I had cash, no, I had traveller's checks, I only had this much, actually I had this much.
Yeah.
The story changes about every 2 lines, doesn't it?
Yeah, and then by the last chapter, that's the poker game scene of the interrogation, and then a follow-up Q&A interrogation with one specific person who helps them to put all the bits together. But it is complicated.
It's a tangled web.
In fact, they use the phrase, don't they, about tangled web, practice to deceive,
Yes.
etc. in there. I had to write myself a note to figure out what was happening, and it was to do with one character having been in jail with another at a certain time, having written to them after they'd been released, something going on with the drug supply in the city being very limited at the time, so it was becoming very expensive to get your fix. You've got the warehouse, you've got the little wooden things, you've got to put all these bits together, and there is a certain amount of follow the money in this. I think I finally figured it out. But even by the end, when you think, well, everyone must have been in it together, they weren't.
No.
And you can't quite reckon it out. And then there's a gang who are killing people that probably aren't to do with that.
Yeah, that's a bit of a almost red herring, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, it's certainly one of the more complex
really
ones
is.
we've ever had, I reckon, if not the most complex one so far.
Yeah, I think you get a bit more of that complexity as you get into the sort of 1980s ones, where the lengths of the novels increase a bit, and sometimes they get a bit more intricate. But it seems quite noticeable at this stage in the series that it's a real ramping up of that complexity.
Definitely.
I think it's slightly longer than the others as well. I seem to know when I got it off my shelf, it seemed a bit fatter, but perhaps
no, I think you're right.
General impression, maybe.
Yeah, could be.
If it seems like we've been rambling and talking nonsense and making this sound like an incoherent story, it's not, but it's one that you do have to read, and it's very hard to relate in terms of a linear thing, because it's not just one thing that's being investigated, it's many things that are being investigated. And so, I'm just going to look for some comments I've got from, I've mentioned before, our friend Hank Wellman, who was always kind enough to send some comments along when we're talking about stuff. Hank's thought was he wondered if McBain wrote Bread before he wrote Hail to the Chief, because he seems to be a more heavily researched book, really. But he also says that the drug smuggling scheme is central in Bread, which is ultimately what this is about. I think if we haven't actually mentioned that, I think it's pretty obvious what these little wooden animals are actually going to be containing. It's similar to the scheme in a Matthew Hope novel, of which I've still not read any of the Matthew Hope stuff, called There Was a Little Girl. He says they're both good reads anyway.
Cool. I've got, I think, one Matthew Hope on my shelf to read, but I've just never really dipped my toe into those.
No,
I thought there was a bit that made it come written after Hail to the chief. Because when he's talking to the gang about the president, and he said there's a bit of a throwaway line about, well, if it was up to me, I'd lock him up and throw away the key or something like that, which I thought, is probably a bit of a dig at Nixon.
Yeah, I think Nixon's still in the air anyway in this. Well, part of what I suppose you could say is one of the issues with this book is that it is a story to do with race, in that Diamondback is a slum, essentially, as the real world equivalents are reflected here. So a lot of the crime ends up in the hands of the black characters. But then that's part of the point of the book is him saying that the conditions that the government, that the local government have left certain parts of the city to rot are creating the situations where, in order to get money to survive, people are doing these elaborate things. They're sort of doing essentially fraud on as a business. There, and at the end, there's a very much that this ends with one of the accused basically saying, "So you taught me how to do it," saying to the white characters, it's capitalism. It's tricksy in balancing that sort of racial prejudice aspect in these stories, but
Yeah. I think when I realised what direction it was going, I thought it was possibly going to end up feeling more problematic than it perhaps does. But I know what you mean. It's a fine balance.
Yeah.
But I think, as you say, that there is at least enough kind of an explanation of the societal background to kind of it's not just racial profiling of as entertainment.
Yes, indeed.
Thankfully.
Okay, right. So let's sum up and do our scores, and then we'll compare it to what's been going on in the at the time, how it was received. In terms of where it sits...
Is that a new graphical...
I've got a new version of Kenneth to try... Well, I've got the old version as well. This is exclusive to us. I don't publish this. This is just...
Goodness.
So we can keep track of things.
New printer.
Admin level Kenneth data.
Yeah. Well, he's got a new plugin.
Oh.
So, Steve-o, do you want to give us your summing up and scoring for this?
Well, I only score when I can see the scores.
Oh, dear me.
Otherwise, I don't get any... and then I get to see the new graph. Oh, it looks good. Yeah, no, I very much enjoyed it, actually. I thought it was a first-rate entry.
Ooh.
With a nice, complicated plot and some nice new characters to enjoy. I would therefore award it... I don't know, what did we think? 88.
88?
Police shields. I'm going quite high on this one.
It's a big number.
High satisfaction rating.
High satisfaction quotient. Okay, I'll go next then. The end is complicated, and it has taken me several readings and writing down a list to try and figure it out. If I'd have had the time, I would have tried to do it as a full flowchart to try and work out who was where, when, and related to who, in what circumstance. But I have read this lots of times, this book. In fact, my copy is falling apart with loose pages. I think this was one I got very, very early on. So it's been with me for some time, this story, and I have enjoyed it quite a lot. I don't know that it's my absolute favourite, but I think it's pretty good. And so I'm going to say that it is 80 police shields for me. 80. And I will pass over to Morgan for his assessment.
Splendid. Yeah, well, it was a first time reading for me. But yeah, I did really enjoy it. I like the complexity of it. I enjoy the more simple novels as well, where you've just got a couple of little strands and a nice quick read. But it's fun to have something that you have to really kind of puzzle out, and
yeah,
I like that. I also love the introduction of Ollie Weeks. I think that's great.
That makes it a standout book alone.
It does, yeah.
I think so. I think it could have edged a bit on the sort of dour side compared to some of the others in the series without Ollie, because you don't have quite so much of the comic relief that you get in some of the other novels. It's like the characters we meet are all kind of pretty much, apart from the security guards, I guess, the drunken security guards who are quite fun. Everyone else is pretty much like some kind of criminal is hiding something.
Yeah, there's certainly none of them. There's no... Well, I suppose maybe the landlady's about the most wacky interviewee they have, but she's the only one,
I mainly
really.
find her kind of tragic rather than a figure of fun. But I really enjoyed it. I don't want to score too highly just because I feel like there's still greater heights than this, but I'll go for what I think is a perfectly respectable score of 78 police shields.
Right. Okay, let's see if Kenneth can do his thing and return a no rounding required score of 82 police shields.
Thank God for that.
So I think that puts it in the
upper echelons.
The upper echelons of the
top quartile, that.
So, yeah, 82 police shields. Very respectable. I will say, you just reminded me about comic relief in the book. Yeah, you're right, there's not lots of it, but there are a few little moments,
There's a few bits.
When Corella's talking to the guy from Records who tells me the joke about the taxidermist.
Oh, yeah.
Which is great. This lady comes into the taxidermist with 2 dead monkeys, and she says she wants them stuffed. So the taxidermist says, yes, I'll stuff the monkeys. You want them mounted too? And the lady thinks for a minute and says, no, they were just friends. Just have them shaking hands.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that.
Which is a very good joke. I like that very much, that one. Okay, well, normally we'd do a quick wrapping up and close now, but I've deliberately held back these reviews from the time. So I've picked out some sentences from it, and we may get the world's #1 Newgate calendar impersonator to read out his response. Crime Ration, Maurice Richardson, The Observer, November 24th, 1974. He says, blah, 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 up to sad standard. Now, I don't know what that means. What is sad standard? As in, does he think the standard's not good? Because generally, Maurice Richardson's been all right about them.
I don't know what that means.
It sounds a bit like he's gone off them to me. But Edmund Crispin, writing in the Sunday Times Criminal Records thing in January 26, 1975, excitement well sustained in a moralistic, we are all responsible, colour-prejudiced tale. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Both of those reviews also mentioned Fat Ollie as a standout.
Splendid.
Washington Post, Gene M. White, in November of 1974, says, McBain not only solves an exciting case, but, as always, captures a feeling for the problems of everyday law enforcement on the streets.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she also mentions Ollie. Then we have Criminals at Large, written by Newgate Calendar, January the 19th, 1975. And it's that larger paragraph there, Morgan, if you want to do your best.
There, I see.
Here comes Newgate Calendar.
I feel like I just need to read it. Read ahead just to
here
get
he comes
it
in, sits down. Yeah.
Oh, here we go. I can't do it now. Bread is the kind of book one reads without thought. Just as it has been written, one feels almost without thought. There's little characterization of any depth. There's little grace to the writing. The action moves, and that is about all one can say for the book. Says Newgate Calendar.
Yeah.
In that exact tone of voice.
There's just no pleasing him, is there?
No.
I did sort of glance over some of the other books he was reviewing in his column that week, and he likes to just stick the boot in quite a lot.
Is there anything he likes?
I don't think so.
Oh, fair enough.
You're going around in life called Newgate Calendar.
I suppose.
Got a chip on your shoulder anyway.
Yeah, sizable chip.
Well, yeah, I mean, we are being silly about that because he has just resolutely hated the 87th Precinct but continued to review them over the years.
Wasn't there one he kind of liked that we were totally flabbergasted
I think
by?
Hail to the Chief, he was a bit sort of, oh, this is all right.
He was relatively indifferent about it, wasn't he?
Yeah. You know, we are taking the mickey out of him, but it's proof that these aren't universally loved, but they are by and large pretty well received, more or less. Although this sad standard comment...
That seems odd, doesn't it? Yeah.
But Newgate Calendar didn't mention Fat Ollie in his review, so there.
I tend to wonder if he's actually even bothered to read them. I suspect someone just dropped a bunch of books on his desk and he took a look at the cover and then wrote something snotty about it and...
Yeah. Oh! He's frightening me. Excuse me. Right, well, we'll wrap up there. Do join us for our bonus episode when we've got our book covers to go through and a little bit more about the year 1974 and the fantasy casting of Detective Maya Maya. And so, until then, I'm going to say goodbye,
Goodbye.
and fare thee well.
Bye.